Hello everyone. So we're going to continue on in Unit 3 and talk about trophic levels. Now I told you guys during our synchronous sessions that I fully expect you guys to remember a lot of this because you learned about this in freshman biology. And even if you don't remember a lot from freshman biology, you'll be surprised at how much you remember from food chains and food webs. So, this right here is a food chain. So it is a singular feeding relationship. All right. And so what they do is it depicts flow of energy and nutrients. So obviously, when something is eaten by another organism, that organism will get energy needed in order to perform normal metabolic functions in their body. So what we're going to do is identify each one of these levels within this food chain and discuss how the energy flows. All right. So one question that I ask every single year is, what is the ultimate source of energy in an environment, in a trophic level? And it is always the sun. So the sun is the ultimate source of energy. It is not plants, y'all. A lot of people say it's plants. It's not. It is the sun, because the plants have to get their energy from somewhere too. Now, plants, because they get their energy from the sunlight, they are called producers. They produce their own food. Another term for producers is autotroph. Hopefully you guys recognize these terms from biology. So producers, autotroph, all plants. All food chains, all food webs start with plants. Okay? They always have to start with a producer. All right. Now, we're going to move on to the rest of the food chain. So, because the plant's a producer, it makes its own food. The rest of these guys do not make their own food. They have to eat something else to get energy. So, these are called consumers. So humans would be a consumer. Another term for consumer is heterotroph. All right, heterotroph. So consumers are heterotrophs. Now, let's look at the first level. In our food chain, the grasshopper is going to eat the grass. So the grasshopper in this food chain is the first consumer. It is the first animal to eat in this food chain. So we call this a primary consumer. A lot of times you will see shorthand notation. Instead of having to write out primary consumer, because it's kind of a lot, you'll see 1 with a degree. That means it is the primary consumer. So 1 with a degree, primary consumer. And remember, this is a grasshopper, so typically your primary consumers are going to be herbivores. You guys remember what an herbivore is? Yep. Animals that only eat plants. All right. So here's our mouse. Our mouse is the second to eat in the food chain. So it will be the secondary consumer. Okay, and keeping with the shorthand notation, it would be a 2 with a degree. So typically, the rest of these animals are going to be either omnivores or carnivores. Okay? So an omnivore eats animals and plants, and a carnivore solely eats meat. So they will be omnivores or carnivores. Okay, moving on. Our snake is the third to eat in the chain, so it is going to be the tertiary consumer. All right, so that makes this a 3 with a degree. Sorry guys, I had to stop the video. I was having a coughing attack and I didn't want y'all to hear me die, so we're gonna keep moving on. All right. So we just finished with the snake as a tertiary consumer. Now the very top of the food chain, because this is the fourth to eat, this is the quaternary consumer. Now, not all food chains will have a quaternary consumer. Most of them will stop at the tertiary level, but sometimes we have an apex predator or a top predator, and that would be the quaternary consumer. And so this would be a 4 with a degree. Okay. Now, you see right here we have mushrooms. And mushrooms can actually feed into every single one of these levels. Now, trophic levels, guys. What I need you to understand is each one of these is a trophic level. Producer, trophic level. Primary consumer is a trophic level. Secondary consumer is a trophic level. Tertiary consumer is a trophic level. So when you're given a question and they ask about trophic levels, they're talking about what position it is in the food chain. Okay, so fungus also play an important role in a food chain as well, and all of these trophic levels can feed into this. Mushrooms and other types of fungus function as decomposers. Okay, also, who else functions as decomposers? Bacteria. So when things die, and any trophic level could die at any point, the decomposers will break down that organic material and return it to the soil, and so those nutrients then get reabsorbed by the plants, and then the food chain happens over again. Now, there are two other very important components within a food chain. They're not pictured here, so we're going to write them down. So not pictured. We have what are called detritivores. Detritivores eat detritus. And you're like, what is this? They eat detritus. And what detritus is decaying organic material. So a great example of a detritivore is an earthworm. I'm just going to draw an arrow right here. An earthworm. Okay. The other thing that is not pictured are scavengers. You guys know what scavengers are. Scavengers eat dead material. So they typically are going to eat dead animals. So examples of scavengers are going to be vultures, hyenas. They play an important role in the food chain as well. Okay, so now that we are familiar with all of these different levels in a single food chain, let's scoot down here and look at the food web. Now, the food web is a model of interlocking food chains. And a food web is typically going to represent an ecosystem. So if you were to look at this picture and I'd say, you know, what ecosystem do you think this represents? And I know we haven't gone over ecosystems, but you could probably figure this out. This would most likely be a grassland or some type of forest possibly. So let's look at the different levels. Now, if you notice here, guys, look, what is always at the bottom? Producers. And we build up, okay? Sometimes you'll see food chains be built in this direction, and then the producers will start here, and then they'll go this way. But just keep in mind that all food webs, food chains start with producers. All right, now this food web is showing a really important concept, that some animals can function at multiple trophic levels. So some animals, what's happening? All right, so some animals can function at multiple trophic levels. This is a question that you would see on an AP test. So let's look at this food web. There's one organism on here that is functioning at 2 different trophic levels. So look at the picture. Do you think you guys can figure out which one it is? Well, if you guessed the bird, you would be correct. So let's look at this. So if we follow this track right here, the bird in this feeding relationship would be the primary consumer. If we follow this track right here, it would be the secondary consumer. And it's the same way right here. Secondary consumer. So hopefully you guys can see that right there. It functions at 2 different trophic levels. Now, you're going to see lots of examples of aquatic ecosystems in one of your assignments where you're going to create a food web is based on an aquatic ecosystem. And so a lot of times the producers that they're referring to in aquatic ecosystems are phytoplankton. Yes, plankton from SpongeBob. Phytoplankton are producers in aquatic food webs. Now, you'll also see the term zooplankton. This is what plankton would be from SpongeBob. Zooplankton are animals, so they are consumers. All right, so don't get these 2 terms mixed up. Phytoplankton, so phyto for photosynthesis, are producers, so they would start an aquatic food web. Zooplankton are consumers, so they would eat the phytoplankton. All right, now I want to go back up here to our food chain, and let's talk about energy transfer. So we know that when animals are consuming different levels, we know that this means energy. But when a grasshopper eats the plant, or you eat a steak, you're not getting 100% of that energy. You're actually only getting 10% of that energy. And it's that way at each level. It's only getting 10% of the energy available. The other 90% is lost as heat. Okay? So that 10%, this is what we're going to learn how to calculate in our next video.